If you're a regular viewer on my channel, you know that when I disappear for a bit on YouTube, it's usually because I'm working on something, and this time is no different. After a few weeks, I have created what I consider a somewhat simplistic way to calculate damage anywhere in Destiny 2 simply by visiting the Trust Land in the EDZ. Now, before I get into the ins and outs of how this works, I wanted to give a backstory as to what motivated me to create this new formula for calculating damage. If you don't care and just want the numbers, you can skip to the time shown on screen now. For everyone else, let's jump into this. Since Destiny launched back in September of 2014, it's been almost universally accepted that damage is based on three pretty basic things: your power level, the enemy's level, and of course the weapon that you are using. These three factors led us to believe that if our power level was higher than that of an enemy's, our damage was scaled down. Now, I can't discredit this assumption, nor do I want to, but I can say that if something is scaled down by some multiplicative factor, it can be scaled up in a similar fashion. But we'll discuss that later in the video. For now, we're just going to assume it was scaled down. I began to think about the idea of scaling down weapons and how this would work, so I decided to start looking to see if anyone else had tackled this before and whether or not it was even worth my time to do so. Doing so, however, I found an incredibly detailed Reddit thread by user Ketchery that was posted way back in July of 2015, and I highly suggest you check that thread out. He did a ton of work, so I've made sure to link that in the description. But within the thread, he posted what seemed to be a fairly simplistic formula: weapon modifier times attack modifier times shot modifier times perk modifiers, and then included three rules, those being: 1, body shot damage always rounds up or down to the closest integer; 2, critical hit damage always rounds down even if it's really close to the next integer; and 3, any ballistics and other damage increasing weapon perks increase damage before any rounding is done. Now, like I said, this seems simple, but it gets complex really quickly. Let's just look at the attack modifier part of this formula, as it really shows how crazy this gets. It should also be noted that this formula was created when attack rating was a thing on weapons and your light affected your level, so things won't directly apply to Destiny 2, but it proves my point on complexity. At this time, weapons had what was called a rarity modifier. Legendary and exotic weapons had a rarity modifier of 80, rares had 60, uncommons were 40, and commons were 20. So to find your attack modifier, you first had to calculate your attack rating and then adjust it based on the rarity modifier. So, for example, if you have a weapon that was a legendary with a 365 attack rating and wanted to know what that weapon would do if it was scaled down to a zone that caps at 300, you would need to find the adjusted attack rating, which would be 220. It's really simple to find. 300 minus 80 equals 220. But like I said, we are trying to find the attack modifier, not the adjusted attack rating. That formula is a lot more complex and looks like this: 300 minus rarity modifier times 1.07 to the log of 1.05025 to the power of attack rating divided by 300. So that being said, for our weapon, the legendary with 365 attack rating, this comes out to 288.38. And when we divide that 288.38 by the adjusted attack rating, which was 220, we get 1.311, meaning the 365 weapon would do 1.311 times more damage in a 365 attack rating cap zone compared to a zone capped at 300, which is conveniently 1.07 times 1.07 times 1.07 times 1.07. So in simple terms, a 300 zone would be 4 levels lower, according to the game, than that of a 365 zone. And now you might say, well, that was out of left field. Why is a 300 zone 4 levels lower than a 365 zone? And why did you do all that math just to tell us that I can multiply 1.07 together based on the level difference between the zones? And that was because we were trying to find the entire formula for damage calculation, not just the attack modifier. So to round out this example of complexity, right now, we started with weapon modifier times attack modifier times shot modifier times perk modifier, and now we have this: weapon modifier times 1.311 times shot modifier times perk modifier. And this was only for comparing two identical weapons between two zones. You would have to repeat this for every single zone and every single weapon if you wanted to test weapons quote-unquote quickly. But I found this to be way too complex for the general player, and I felt that there had to be a way to simplify this down, and there in fact is. For Destiny 2, I've created this formula: base modifier times zone modifier times shot modifier times perk modifier. Now, if you didn't skip to this point in the video, you see that formula and say to yourself, that looks identical to the formula with some name changes that you just said. But bear with me, you'll see in a second how much more simplistic this formula is in comparison. So let's first talk about what base modifier is. The base modifier is the damage dealt to the body of any fallen in the Trust Land in the EDZ. There's nothing more to it. So let's use the Midnight Q as an example, which happens to be 100 damage to the body of a Fallen. This is what you would use for every single weapon. Go to the trash line, shoot a Fallen, you got your base modifier. So next, let's talk about zone modifier. The zone modifier is a little more complex than the base modifier, but that's only because it required some additional legwork to get, but I've already done that part, so it's really simple for you. The zone modifier is simply a multiplier that each zone has tied to each of the races of enemies. In some zones, the modifier does not change between enemy race, such as on Mars, where the entire planet's patrol area has a zone modifier of 6.2, and that's regardless if the target is a Cabal or a Hive, but in other zones, however, it does matter which enemy race is the target, such as in the trash land, where the multiplier is 1 for Fallen, thus being the base modifier, and 1.23 for Cabal. Now what makes this formula really simplistic is if you just want to know the body damage, you could stop here, multiply the base modifier by the zone modifier, and you're done. And if you want a list of the different modifiers, a link to a spreadsheet that I've made can be found in the description. But if I know you guys, I know you all want more than that, so let's discuss the other two damage multipliers, starting with the shot modifier. The shot modifier can be really simple if you just want headshot damage to be accounted for. Now, I don't have an entire list of every headshot multiplier in the game, but I do know that the Midnight Coup has a 2.99x headshot multiplier. This means when shooting a Fallen in the trash land, you'll do 299 damage in the head. From here, you can look at the spreadsheet in the description, multiply it by the correct zone multiplier, and you're done. Now, you'll be off by a few points here and there, and your damage won't be 100% accurate, but for the most part, it's pretty close. However, if you want to get super in depth, you can take it one step further, and to do so, I'll be using Mars as an example. On Mars, due to the 6.2x multiplier, the 299 headshot damage from the trash land becomes 1858. Now for you math whizzes out there, you're gonna say 299 times 6.2 isn't 1858. It's 1853.8, and you're right. But that's because the multiplier is not really 6.2, it's 6.2138676296.8, which if you multiply 100, our base modifier, with the 2.99, our headshot multiplier, and then multiply that with our zone modifier, the 6.2138676296.8, we get 1857.9464 damage. And then there's some additional change, which rounds up to be 1858. Now, I'm certain you are wondering where I got that long 6.21 number from. Well, if you watch the entire video, you'll remember the number 1.07 from the attack modifier formula. If you skip to this part, well, the best way I can quickly summarize this is that Bungie likes 7, so 1.07 is a cool bungo number, I guess. Regardless, 1.07 is an important number that Bungie uses to calculate the difference in damage between the difference in levels between two zones or two enemies in some cases, and trust me, that was just as confusing to say as it probably was to hear, so I'm going to try to simplify it. Let's say a zone or enemy is level 2, and you are level 2. This would result in 0 difference. So in this case, that's damage times 1.07 to the power 0, or damage times 1, or just damage. But let's then change this to you being level 30 in a level 29 zone. We know that damage caps when you're over leveled, so the level difference here is 27 levels from the level 2 zone we were previously in. So we take our previous damage, and instead of multiplying it by 1.07 to the power of 0, we have 27 level differences, so we multiply it by 1.07 to the power of 27, which happens to be 6.2138676296.8, the multiplier for Mars, which happens to be a level 29 zone. However, I said this would be simple. So if you want it complex, take everything I said and find a way to put it in your blame place. But if you want it simple, you need to multiply 4 things: base modifier, zone modifier, shot modifier, and perk modifier. Shot modifier is simply crit or no crit, and zone modifier are listed on the spreadsheet, and base modifier is whatever you do to the body of a Fallen in the Trostland. And the last thing, the perk modifier, this is whatever perk the weapon happens to have and whether or not it adds damage. A couple examples of what these would be Rampage or Kill Clip. So now, let's give an example that ties this all together into one damage number so you guys can understand. So once again, this is our formula. Base modifier times zone modifier times shot modifier times perk modifier. Throughout the video, I've used the Midnight Coup, and that's what I'm going to do here as well to do this example. The Midnight Coup does 100 damage to the body of a Fallen in the Trostland. This is our base modifier. Now let's make a guess and say the new area coming in the Forsaken the Tangle Shore is a level 40 zone. This would put it 38 levels above the Trostland, putting the zone modifier at 13.079. And we will assume we are level 40, so the delta doesn't come into play, and we are capped on damage. We then take into account that we in fact did hit a crit, so 2.99 for our shot modifier, and then for simplicity's sake, we haven't got a kill recently, so Rampage isn't active, so our perk modifier is 1. Multiplying these all together, I can, and even you can, predict the damage to be 3,911 when we shoot a Scorn in the head in the Tingled Shore come September if it is a level 40 zone. Now I know that was a lot to take in, but there's still a few more things I want to include and clarify with this whole thing. This is damage per shot, not damage per second. These are very different things. Even though they share the same acronym of DPS, in order to calculate damage per second, we need to determine RPM, time to reload, and other factors. These two things are very different and would take an entirely different video to explain. Regardless, damage per shot and damage per second are very, very different. This video is focused on damage per shot. The second thing I want to mention is that this doesn't account for shielded enemies, which sometimes reduce the damage of kinetics by 50% and sometimes don't. It doesn't account for an energy weapon and power weapon shooting unmatched shields, which do 100% additional damage, nor does it account for energy and power weapons hitting matching shields, which does 200% additional damage. And then it also has an explosion, which I haven't even tested. The third thing that this video doesn't mention until now is that if you want to use this to test shotguns, you have to do the math based on the damage per pellet, not the damage of all the pellets combined, which in turn means you need to know how many pellets each shotgun has, and most are 12, some are 1, and also take that into consideration when doing this whole thing. End of the day, this isn't the be-all, end-all of damage calculations. There are way more factors, but this will give you a fairly accurate calculation of damage per shot down to the 100 billionth of a damage point. That is if you want to go that far into it. Regardless, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button, and if you happen to be new here, consider subscribing. Also, down in the comment section, there will be a pinned comment from me asking you guys what you want me to test on an unnecessary level. You want me to test the Nova explosion of match shields to an in-depth level that no one needs to truly know? Well, then let me know down in that comment. You want me to compare weapons? Put it down there. Whatever you want me to test, reply to the pinned comment. Also, I have a community Discord where you can also put your suggestions or post memes or just have a conversation. If any of that interests you, you can find a link to that in the description as well. But I do want to mention one more thing about the Discord. I recently made an invite-only clan to kind of push the boundaries of things in Destiny, and if you want a chance to be part of that invite-only clan, I choose the members from the Discord, so there's also that. As always, thank you for your continued support, but that's all I got for you guys today. So I'm gonna get out of here. So my name is Matt, and I'll see you guys next time.